Hi, it's Uncle Larry. Is it still a reporter's job to be objective? I think so. We're going to look at that concept today and see where it takes us. My question is, do you trust the media to be objective? If not, well, let's just have a closer look at the concept, see where we go. I could have used a more recent example to start things off, but this one I saved works good enough. It's from back in 2021, in which an Ottawa journalist made the following two-sentence statement on Twitter the day after the last federal election was called. Here it is, quote, "The biggest existential issue facing Canada at this moment is the climate emergency. The question for journalists is whether we will use our platforms to press the parties and their leaders on this critical issue during the election," unquote. So there it is. The first of the two sentences is not even that controversial. I'll repeat it. The biggest existential issue facing Canada at this moment is the climate emergency. And of course, it was a big issue in 2021, and it is today. So there it is. It's the second sentence that gives me pause. So let me repeat that. So after saying that the biggest existential issue facing Canada at this moment is the climate emergency, in the second sentence, he goes on to say that the question for journalists is whether we will use our platforms to press the parties and their leaders on these political or critical issues during the election. Gives me pause. What is a reporter's role in holding authority to account when it comes to specific issues? In his case, it was climate change. And I'm not writing about columnists or pundits who are paid precisely to offer opinions. I'm not speaking about them. What about the danger of reporting sliding into activism? This may be an old-fashioned idea, but what about the notion of objectivity? How do we even characterize the concept in our politically polarized environment right now? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is objectivity is not some thing. It's not some essence up on a metaphysical perch above us somewhere. You can't locate it like that. Objectivity is just a mindset. It's an attitude. Objectivity is a way of comporting yourself. Objectivity is a bearing designed to reduce any biases which might skew your perspective. Objectivity helps reporters dampen the influence of their own prejudices and values in the interests of accuracy. It's inexact, of course, because humans are imperfect, but that's the goal. Tom Rosenstiel of the UMD College of Journalism has this to say about objectivity. When the concept of objectivity migrated to journalism in the 1920s, it was not intended to suggest journalists were without bias. Actually, it was just the opposite. The idea was that journalists needed to employ objective, observable, repeatable methods of verification in their reporting, precisely because they could never be personally objective. Their methods of reporting had to be objective because they never could be, and we can't be. To understand objectivity's meaning, the method should be transparent and the search for verification should be disciplined. So good words from the professor there. Now, there used to be a caution about a reporter being too close to the story. Many of you know that my main area of activism in the past lies in the realm of disability awareness, and there were times in my career when I would deliberately hand a story involving disabilities to someone else, to another colleague, because I knew I could not maintain the required journalistic distance. Now, this attitude used to be admired. Now it's disappeared. And one of the casualties is the enterprise of journalism itself, as a majority of people now think the media is hopelessly lopsided in favor of activism rather than for an objective search for truth. And this applies right across the political spectrum, left and right, etc. Let's draw a further distinction between journalism and activism. On the one hand, journalism is supposed to be a humble enterprise, a process of uncovering truth in a complicated world. Activism, on the other hand, pursues its objectives with a righteous certainty that already knows the truth. Activists seek not merely to report on the world, but to refashion the world. It's the very definition of what an activist seeks to do. Journalists may very well share a passion for a particular cause, but their job is to follow the facts, wherever they may lead. We can't ignore something that reflects badly on a noble cause as an activist might. We have to care about the means as much as the end because our duty is to search for the truth as presented by the best available evidence, and to conduct that search without fear or favor. Now, there's another perceived danger. It is that a quest for objectivity amounts to reducing journalism to a form of both sidesism. That would be missing the point as well. So let's go back to Professor Rosenstein, because this is also a concern of his. He says, quote, "This notion of objectivity never was meant to simply balance the he said, she said reporting. Journalism was always aimed at truth. Passionate, independent inquiry does not mean mindlessly giving both sides equal treatment, thinking there are just two sides to a story, or using the he said, she said balance as a wishy-washy excuse for not doing the work of finding the truth." Rosenstein is concerned that journalistic credibility erodes further and further when aligned purely and exclusively with identified causes. But he also worries that both sidesism represents a new misunderstanding of objectivity. He fears it's taking root in some newsrooms today and could destroy the already weakened system of journalism, which democracy depends on. Okay, now let's get more specific to Canada. What are some of the obstacles Canadian reporters are up against before they even begin to objectively report on various political issues? Well, to begin with, a sizable portion of them are working under subsidies from the government in power, allocated to their owners, which are keeping them afloat. This isn't an argument against the subsidies. It's a mess. But this does hang over newsrooms. Don't kid yourself. And some unions representing news organizations openly campaign via advertising against certain political parties. And if you don't think that places a chill on viewpoint diversity in newsrooms, you're dreaming. I have experience. Listen to me. And if you throw in calls from reporters themselves, like the Ottawa reporter I mentioned at the start, to align with certain causes, then the public has every right to have a jaundiced view of the entire journalistic enterprise. Is it any wonder almost every poll on the media shows a seemingly irreversible erosion of trust? I want to stay with this point on government bailouts or subsidies a moment longer. Journalist Rudyard Griffiths, an old friend of mine, explains it this way, quote, "Did you know that before long, fully half of the salaries of most journalists working for private companies will be paid in one form or another by the government in power? And that's just private companies, not the CBC." He goes on to ask, "Are you comfortable with this truly bizarre state of affairs in Canadian news media?" We also know that in the next 18 months or so, there will be a federal election. It's going to be a high-stakes campaign, sharply different visions of the country's future on offer this time. Wow. And it's going to be fought for the first time in an information environment in which the majority of the salaries of most news journalists, including at private media outlets, will be subsidized by the policies of the government in power. So how is it going to sit with you when you realize that almost all the news you're consuming is directly or indirectly government subsidized? Will you be more or less likely to trust the media's objectivity? Will you take reporting as factual or government-funded spin? Okay, I've gone in a lot of different directions. Let's summarize. First, remember that objectivity isn't some thing that you can locate, some essence. It's a mindset. It's an attitude. Objectivity is a way of comporting yourself. It's a bearing designed to reduce any biases which might alter your perspective. Objectivity helps journalists dampen down the influence of their own prejudices and values in the interests of accuracy. It's inexact, of course, but that's the goal. Second, journalism isn't about righteous certainty. It isn't about righteous certainty. It's about humble, dogged, tedious work of uncovering facts, turning them into questions, and demanding answers, period. Journalists hold power to account. Activists pursue power. Let me say that again. Journalists hold power to account. Activists pursue power. This isn't a value judgment. It's just the way it is. And there's supposed to be a difference.